Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to this session, which we're all a bit spread out as we're split section now. I mean, if anyone would like to move forward a bit, it'll feel a little bit more intimate. If you don't, no problem, but the invitation is to do so there. Now, this session is a focus on the United States, a country where some people have complained we don't make anything anymore. Well, of course, that's not correct. The United States is still a manufacturing nation. And I've got two very interesting experts to come up and talk to me about that and to discuss with you exactly what's going on there now. We have Dr. Susan Helper, who is a professor of economics at the Case Western Reserve University. She's a former chief economist for the US Department of Commerce and a former member of the White House staff. And we also have Danny Seabright, who is president of the US-UAE Business Council, that may well be known to some of you. Please, will you join me on the stage? Right, let's be seated. I think, to kick this off, I think the first question I would like to ask, and we can discuss, is there something of a resurgence of manufacturing in the United States? Are we seeing signs of that? And if indeed we are, is it one that is likely to continue? And is it one that may even predate the new president we have? Over to you, first of all.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy to be here, and thanks for a generous host. So yeah, I think what I want to say is that manufacturing in the U.S. Has grown, and kind of an intermediate story here, where so between about 2000 and 2010, the U.S. lost a third of its manufacturing jobs. And then between 2010 and 2015, gained back about 800,000 jobs. In the last year or so, it's been relatively stagnant. And so I think, in fact, yes, there were a number of Obama administration policies that I think can be credited with some of that resurgence. The rescue of the auto industry, the setting up of some institutes for applied manufacturing modeled on the German Fraunhofer, some grants for apprenticeship. I think all these things have started a resurgence. I also think some developments in the private sector, so increased awareness of some of the hidden costs of manufacturing far away. So in terms of lost connection between production and innovation, the impacts of reduced flexibility, increased lead time, that these are hard to capture in corporate accounting systems but are beginning to be seen. And so the U.S. makes about half of the value added in manufacturing that we consume. And so I think then that potentially there's a room to increase this number. I don't think a huge number, but I think that it's about 9% of the U.S. workforce is in manufacturing. You could see that go up to maybe 10 or 12%. So this is, I think, a very intermediate position between the people who say manufacturing is inevitably going to decline, and then this idea that all jobs will come back. I also think what's up for grabs is the quality of those jobs, and I don't see this as inevitable and driven by technology. So we see a couple of developments. So one is increasing number of engineering jobs, a lot more requirement and use of problem solving on the shop floor, so creating good production jobs. But we also see really horrible jobs created at minimum wage, temporary jobs with no job security and no training. And so you've actually seen an increase in industrial accidents in the US. And about a third of all manufacturing workers are eligible, manufacturing production workers are eligible for public assistance. So I think a policy really is going to say, which direction do we go? And I think not only public policy of the kind that we've had in the past, but also corporate policy. And can corporations actually recognize, get out of their silos and recognize the potential of some investments in training, in innovation? And I think this is true not only for the US, but also if we think about manufacturing inside other countries as well.
Okay, thank you. I should say, if we could hopefully have a few moments to take some questions, so if you want to make a note of some questions, please do so, and we'll try and take those at the end. Danny, from your perspective, give me your opinion. What do you see, and what's happening?
Well, first I want to say thanks to the hosts, Badr Olama at Strata, who was the driving force behind organizing GMIS, and also to The Economist for the great job you're doing as a partner. Very, very pleased to be here, and of course to share the stage with someone as eminent as Susan, Dr. Helper. You all know that we've elected a president in the United States named Donald Trump, and he won the election on the strength of his vision for making America great again. One of the problems with our election that occurred this time around, it was almost devoid of any really serious treatment of any of the issues. It was all political polemic, almost completely. A central component of Mr. Trump, or President Trump now's vision during the campaign, was restoring manufacturing jobs, perhaps to an almost idealized past of bringing back high-paying manufacturing jobs that just don't really exist anymore and have gone and have left the U.S. for a whole lot of reasons. Now that said, and to Susan's point, the U.S. does still manufacture a lot. Total industrial output increased more than 250% from 1980 to 2015. What's changed is the decrease in the workforce. And the workforce numbers have decreased for a number of reasons, but most probably, or most importantly, the trend of automation, to a lesser degree outsourcing, and to a change that's occurred in our education system, which we could spend a whole session on, in my opinion. In any case, guided by this powerful idea of bringing back U.S. manufacturing jobs, President Trump appealed to a segment of our population who was really, that this really captured their imagination. He's made a series of new appointments. He's issuing executive orders, statements since his election that will have a dramatic impact, although not entirely predictable how that impact will play out over time on industry itself. And as we go through the discussion, I could take a couple minutes to talk about my view of some of the opportunities, some of the risks that are in play from a political and an overall economic standpoint. But I'm going to tell you right up front that I don't agree with a lot of what is coming, the political rhetoric that's coming out at the moment. We'll stop there.
I'm sure we'll get further on there. So we could be looking at a much more inward-looking America, one that looks to itself much more. What are going to be the implications then for other countries wanting to do business with the United States and to trade with the United States and to invest in or indeed attract investment from the United States? Dr. Helper.
Well, I think the U.S. has been a kind of engine of growth for the world. I think, and one of the reasons that manufacturing job growth has stagnated in the last year is austerity, frankly, in other markets, particularly Europe. And I think that a more inward focus on, for a variety of countries, could actually be quite beneficial. And I think we've seen, it may be time to kind of think not just about between countries, but within countries, how we raise standard of living. So if we think about NAFTA, for example, in both the U.S. and Mexico, we've seen increases in GDP per capita, but we've seen stagnant wages for the bottom half of the population. And so I think an inward focus of reinvesting in our own infrastructure, which is crumbling, particularly as we come to all the brand new great things here, reinvesting in our education system and healthcare, I think will be a great thing for America. I think it's also a strategy that other countries may may adopt as well.
Danny, please.
I'd offer that I think many U.S. manufacturers and business leaders are at home in my country are very enthusiastic about a Trump administration. After all, President Trump is a businessman. One could argue about how successful he's been or not been over time, but he is a businessman who's surrounded himself with fellow businessmen and women in the administration. He appointed the former CEO of ExxonMobil, Rex Tillerson, as America's top diplomat. Moreover, he's demonstrated a preference for businessmen over bureaucrats and academics when staffing key administration posts. This is evidenced by the appointment of former hedge fund manager Steve Mnuchin from Goldman Sachs as Treasury Secretary and billionaire investor William Ross as the Commerce Secretary. President Trump has also made a point of soliciting the advice of the business community, particularly manufacturers. He's held meetings with automotive firms, retail chains, drug companies, airlines, and many other industry groups since becoming president. Most notably, he created a national manufacturing council comprised of 28 leading CEOs to advise him on issues such as infrastructure, tax reform, and workforce training, all the issues that are going to affect our manufacturing policy for the future. I have a number of my member company CEOs who sit on his National Manufacturing Council, and it's very interesting to start to hear some of the vignettes or that are coming out of those meetings. Both inside and outside of meetings with manufacturers, President Trump has promised to roll back regulations and streamline regulatory approval processes. This, along with tax reform, are the two issues, or the two suites of issues, in my view, that our industry is most interested in what President Trump is going to do. And obviously, our stock market is very interested in this, and that's why it's over 2,000-point gain since President Trump has become president.
Okay, so you've got a rollback in regulation promised, tax reform promised, all very popular things for businessmen. But can he deliver? Can this be delivered?
Well, on environmental policy, he's doing it right now. We just had, in the last few weeks, the expedited construction of the two controversial pipelines, Keystone XL and Dakota Access. He's already staffed the EPA with basically someone who doesn't believe climate change exists or is caused by the human condition. So the executive orders are flowing out of the White House in a number of these areas. And maybe Susan has some more detail on some of that, but it's astonishing the number of things that he's going to try to do in this area. Now, can he bring Congress along from a budgetary standpoint, and especially after the failure of the health care bill last week in Congress? That's the big question mark that's now starting to emerge in Washington.
So that was a pointer, do you think, for more trouble to come?
It is definitely going to challenge him with what he wants to do with tax reform, because he's lost a lot of political capital. Paul Ryan has lost an incredible amount of political capital over the debacle of health care reform.
Susan, what do you think?
Well, I think that, as Danny said, I think it's a sort of a vision, a problem definition that won Trump the presidency. But I think his execution has been challenged, and I think also some of the things that he wants to do are quite damaging, perhaps, to some of his own supporters. I actually think you take the issue of regulation. Regulation has costs, but it has benefits as well. I mean, the studies have been done that usually the benefits are 2 to 3 times the level of the costs. Even from a business competitive standpoint, companies make plans, and I worry about our auto industry. I mean, one of the things he wants to do is roll back our corporate average fuel economy, the planned increase and stringencies of those things. That part of what that was doing was making our economy look like the rest of the world, and help us compete in design cars that could compete in Europe, compete in places with higher gas prices. I think that's it's going to be difficult and perhaps damaging in the long term to our companies to be doing that. I also think there's this kind of make America great again in a way. You could take that as we're going to make America great and the world great, or we could be a kind of xenophobic way of we're going to do the U.S. at the expense of other countries. And I think too much of the policy has been at the expense of other countries. Well, I don't think that's a necessary thing, but that's the way he's done it.
Well, he said he's going to level the playing field for U.S. manufacturers relative to foreign competitors, particularly those in China. So there's a real anti-China thrust to this as well. He promised to get tough on China. His his appointment of outspoken China critic Robert Lightser as U.S. Trade Representative, and Dr. Peter Navarro is author of a book called Death by China. He's head of the newly created National Trade Council, and he says he's going to be true to his word on this. So the working against China, and it's really, as an American, for me to hear Chinese premier, Chinese leaders talk about open and free trade in a way that I always thought was what America and Europe led in the world, for now that to be sort of the Chinese government leading that trend, and America wanting to be closed and shut down free trade is really, really troubling.
So I guess what I'd like to do is sort of think about a third way of trade. Can we actually have trade that really promotes innovation so that the best products from around the world can find their markets, as opposed to a trade that's based on who can exploit their workers the most? And I think if you look at trade agreements, they do a couple things. One is they reduce tariffs, but there's a lot of protection in these agreements for certain interests. If it was truly free trade, they wouldn't be 3,000 pages long. So they have protection for investors. There's special courts, the investor-state dispute resolution system. And a lot of it benefits U.S. manufacturers, particularly in pharmaceuticals, who are allowed to keep their data private, raising pharmaceutical prices around the world. And yet, really not very many protections for workers. Can we actually change that? I mean, I think this is where Trump, his promises and his proposals may find some conflicts.
I think, if I could, one last point on the appointments. We're 60 days into the administration. We have something in Washington called the Plum Book, where all of the new president's the jobs that he gets to appoint, or she would get to appoint, it's about a little over 4,000. We have a few heads of the main departments appointed and confirmed by the Senate, and that's it. We don't have any deputy secretaries. We don't have any undersecretaries. We don't have any assistant secretaries. So just as an example, there's no one from the U.S. government at this conference this week. I mean, there are a few folks from the U.S. Embassy here in Abu Dhabi observing, but there's no official U.S. representative coming out from Washington to take part in what is a really, really important thought leadership conference on the future of manufacturing and the efficiencies and the sustainability of manufacturing. Because we don't have anyone in Washington from the political level that's in the job officially, that's confirmed in the job by the U.S. Senate, and able to come out and go to foreign countries and go to conferences like this. So we're really hamstrung. And the process is going to be really delayed all through the summer, in my view, into the fall. And the Trump administration is really getting off to a slow start in that regard.
If I could pick up on that one then. So if you are running an overseas company outside the United States, and you are hoping to enter the US market, or you're hoping to attract investment from the US into your own market, I mean, who do you talk to now? Who do you listen to? Where do you go? I mean, what kind of position are you in? How would you advise somebody in that position what
I'm
to do?
going to let Susan answer first as a former official from Commerce and White House.
Oh, darn, I was going to pass it to you. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I guess I learned personally from my time in D.C. was that it's one thing to sign a trade agreement that lowers trade barriers. It's another thing to actually take advantage of that and figure out how to compete in another market and learn a bunch of rules about how do you gain access to that market in practice, whether you're exporting from the U.S. or importing to the U.S. And there's a whole staff that does that, and I guess your point that staff is hamstrung and looking for direction seems quite right to me.
Right. Look, I'm telling my companies if they ask that this is just going to be a process right now that's going to take time. We don't know what a lot of the Trump administration's real policies are going to be. They haven't been written yet. There's campaign rhetoric. But he and his team he's now the president, and just for example, a U.S. embassy working in a foreign country has to start getting guidance and talking points from Washington to tell its diplomats and its ambassadors what the administration is promoting. That isn't happening yet on a whole lot of trade issues or investment issues or manufacturing issues. It's happening on security. It's happening with executive orders and on bans of travel and things like that, but it's not happening in this whole other suite of issues.
But maybe if I could say a positive thing, I mean, I think there's a lot of fundamentals in the U.S. that remain positive.
Correct.
And particularly for investment, that there's a large market in the U.S., that investing to serve that market locally, the kind of Honda has a mantra of build where you sell. I think there's a lot of to be said for that, and that the U.S. is a great place to invest. I think seeing those fundamentals, seeing the rise in labor costs around the world, seeing the benefits of being close to a large market, all those things are still there. I think one of the things that both U.S. and foreign companies can do is maybe reduce some silos that make it difficult to value investments. I mean, the U.S. is a relatively high-wage country. It's also a high-productivity country. And so it maybe take a little bit of reduction in silos to understand the benefits, where your HR side sees costs, but say if you're thinking about doing a training investment, you can see benefits from your operations side, but you need to use some big data techniques to actually marry that and see those outcomes. And so for example, I worked with my old colleagues in the Department of Commerce to release a report recently about apprenticeship. And one of the companies actually we worked with was Siemens, and found that when we helped them marry their HR data and their production data, they get about a 40 to 50% return on their investment in apprentices. So they're investing $200,000 in high school graduates, so 18-year-olds. But the ability that they have to understand what they're doing and mix the fundamental understanding of principles with the practical application they're getting at Siemens really, really pays off, and we could see it in their data.
Indeed, I mean, you're beginning to see benefits in other countries with apprenticeship schemes, particularly because you're talking about quality of jobs. I mean, unskilled labor is going to be the most vulnerable, I guess, and the way to turn that unskilled labor into some kind of skilled labor is perhaps through apprenticeship schemes.
I guess, unfortunately, I see there's also a lot of rise, particularly in the U.S. South, of these very low-wage, very dangerous jobs with a lot of production pressure. And so companies, can come there, pay very little tax. I don't think it's a great way to develop a country or a state, but I do see that as a potential future. So I see sort of two problems with robots.
Yeah.
One is too many robots, the other is too few robots.
Susan, I was going to ask you as an educator, the American education system is just going through this huge reform movement right now. And when it comes to manufacturing and it comes to productivity, don't we need a whole lot more people coming out of secondary school that go to community college, go to a technical school, and get trained to do or to make something in that way, instead of going to a four-year university or college and studying philosophy or history or something like that? I mean, do we need to go back to basics in some ways with education? And is that something that Trump might actually propose? I think it is.
So I'm all in favor of increasing apprenticeships, and I think it's really important because of this mix of practical and fundamental skill. I actually am also in favor of increasing four-year college degrees. Only about 30% of Americans graduate from college, a four-year college, so it's not like it's saturated. And we talk a lot about the need for people, kids that are going to have multiple jobs over their lifetime, and I think you have to know how to learn how to learn. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I worry about in community colleges, so I think that the worst is no training. Second worst is a kind of 6-week boot camp about here's the button you push on this machine, push it, and then when the machine changes brand or there's an evolution of technology, you're sunk. The third, I guess I would see, is the apprenticeship, where you learn something about physics, you learn something. And then the fourth, I still think that there's a lot of value to the philosophy, and not least in making people good citizens. I mean, I think part of the things we've seen is a decline in the political culture of the U.S. That's going to hurt us economically as well. So I agree with you on let's increase apprenticeship for the reasons you said.
I think that's key to the manufacturing policy that's going to come. I'm hearing a lot of people talk about that.
Can I move to the question of sort of what sort of jobs could be brought back, if indeed there are jobs that could be brought back? I mean, we've seen some reshoring in America. We've seen promises of new investment. But companies I've spoken to that are doing this and bringing production that, or starting up production that has some cases been done overseas and bringing it back and putting it in America, often the reason is nothing to do really with cost. It's to do with time to market, or being closer to R&D, or being that they can react more quickly to fashion trends and things like this. I mean, there's an Adidas factory opening in America shortly, which is going to make trainers, which are traditionally made in China and Indonesia and Vietnam. But it's only going to employ a couple of hundred people to make 500,000 trainers a year. The rest is going to be 3D printing and robots and things like that. So what sort of jobs will come back? Because these aren't the jobs that left.
So I guess I would say two things in answer to that. So one is we should think about the robots have to be maintained and designed by somebody.
Okay, yeah.
We may not count those jobs in manufacturing, but they're jobs, and they're very good jobs. And I think that also points to this idea. People often will say, well, labor-intensive work like apparel and shoes will never come back. And I think the issue of recognizing the true cost of lead time is really important. And the cost of lead time is not just that you're carrying inventory for a few weeks. It's also that you have a lot of scenarios. You know, do people want the red ones or the blue ones? Or the polka dot's going to sell? Is it size 12 or size 15 or whatever? And so being able to build to order, you can dramatically cut. Often you need to produce maybe a third of what you were producing before. So even if the cost per unit is higher than in the US, you're producing only a third as much. So your total cost falls. So that's one point about the kinds of industries that can come back. I think that, and so then I think, yes, let's make sure that we count all the jobs that come back, including these robot maintenance and robot design jobs.
Could some of those jobs be more service related? Because you often see, I mean, you go into a modern car factory today and you think, is it lunchtime? I can't see anybody. And yet there are a lot of people employed in ancillary services and businesses.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number, so I think this is an important, so I guess maybe to elaborate on my point that, so there's too many robots and too few. So to deal with the productivity consequences, there's a whole variety of things that you could do. So one is we could sort of start again to think about cutting working hours. And we haven't really cut, it's been a 40-hour week in the US since the 1920s. Second thing we could do is train people so that they can go on and do more things. We can create new occupations, personal trainer and things like that. I also think that there's a point at which a lot of companies don't adopt robots because they can get labor so cheap. So these examples of these temp jobs that pay, $8, $9 an hour, particularly in Alabama and Mississippi, I think that's actually not a great development, but it's one that we're seeing. And so I think that what we need to do is actually capacitize the workers, think about increasing bargaining power of workers, and also help small companies learn how to adopt robots. That we have a lot of small companies, and this I think is a challenge for lead firms. If you think about the private sector, I mentioned some of the silos in investment, valuing investments and training for workers. There's also silos in terms of valuing investments in suppliers. That too often, purchasing agents are incentivized to, who's got the low piece price, can we switch, whatever, and not value the opportunities for co-development, collaboration, et cetera. And so I think American companies or companies in the US are going to find themselves hamstrung a bit by the weakness of the small firm sector in the US.
Susan and I talked about this a little bit before. I believe largely these jobs are not going to come back, largely. The jobs that left. Other jobs could be created and come to the US or be created in the US. And I think this is going to be the principal difference between Trump's rhetoric and the political reality that has to be dealt with and has to be reconciled, if you will. And with manufacturers and with big companies, as Susan was saying. The common interest here in the growth of manufacturing, Trump's political statements are, his stated metric for success is numbers. Whereas for the manufacturers and the companies, it's going to be about productivity, it's going to be about efficiency, it's going to be about bringing robots in some cases, or automation, if you will, in some cases, or AI. But to keep them competitive in the global marketplace overall. And there's a mismatch there between what Trump has said politically in the rhetoric and what really is where American manufacturing needs to go. So that's what we have to figure out.
And I think a third metric is wages. That we're actually at pretty close to full employment, about 4.9% unemployment, which really can't go a lot lower than that. So I think the real metric that people should care about is the quality of the jobs. We've seen actually fairly stagnant incomes, as I mentioned, for the bottom half of the population. What can we do to bring those incomes up? And I think it's, productivity growth is always nice, always important, but also thinking about what are we going to do on the bargaining power side.
Just to throw it out a little bit more openly, though, so what's then, is manufacturing still important for countries that want to develop and grow? Is it still something worth pursuing? Or could you say, no, actually, we'll look to services? I mean, from the experience of America, is it worth doing? And what should countries do to do it? What would you suggest?
So I would say that, so in the US, about 9% of employment is in manufacturing and about 12% of GDP. And as I said, I think we could increase that slightly and should increase it slightly. Germany is actually at about 20% of GDP in manufacturing. I don't know if the US can go that high, but maybe we could be 15%. But that's still a sector about the size of healthcare in the US. So I think it's an important sector, and it's important to have government and I think also corporate policies that work to improve both the supply side and the demand side, to coordinate improvements. So if you train people and there's no jobs for them, that's a problem. If you want to create jobs and there's nobody trained, that's a problem. So let's do it together. Government can help a lot with that. But I think it's only one sector. And so you want to do similar policies and think about the supply side and the demand side and agriculture and health and education. So it's a key sector, but it's not the all-important sector.
And there's key aspects of these other sectors. You said agriculture or healthcare, where manufacturing is critical as well.
Right.
And I absolutely believe that manufacturing is critical and important to America's growth for the future. We just have to get it right. To the point about labor, we need to be working more on sort of the high-tech, high-end of certain things, and that comes back to a sound education policy. I mean, there's just some of these pieces all have to be brought together, and quite frankly, the leadership on this has just been very uneven over the last 20 years. We've gotten lost in America.
And I also think that the sustainability piece, that manufacturing has a really important role, that, in some extent what we're talking about is moving away from an oil-based economy to a manufactured energy economy. So manufacturing wind turbines, manufacturing solar panels, that's actually, you could create many thousands of jobs doing that and changing the economy around. We need a different built environment that's built to minimize energy use. So both renewable energy and energy efficiency, I think there's a huge opportunity around the world in redoing a built environment to allow us to use less energy.
And I say we got lost. We got lost, in my view, from a public policy standpoint. A great presentation this morning by GE. I've been to the Minds and Machine Conference. I've been to some of the American companies are on the cutting edge of doing some really, really amazing stuff. So they're pushing ahead appropriately and rightly. Maybe we need to get the regulation of that right in some areas, but in my view, it's the public policy piece that we need to work on.
Because I would disagree. I don't know. So I'm willing. So public policy needs to be. I mean, I think Obama did some stuff that started not at the scale of the problem, but I also think that a lot of the problems actually are I would lay at the feet of corporations. That these kind of quarterly focus on profits on quarterly has really hamstrung American companies from making long-term investments either in their workers or in suppliers. They haven't been willing, and the markets haven't been willing to value investments in human capital or supplier capital in the way that they have valued an acquisition. And so I think we've seen a lot of financial engineering and not as much investment in actual physical things. You go to supplier factories, and you see equipment. And so actually the average age of manufacturing equipment in the US is the highest it's been since the 1940s. So we have a lot of really old equipment, even at a time when there's all kinds of opportunity to really upgrade.
Maybe when Mr. Trump changes all the tax policy and all that money that's overseas, it can be repatriated home with very little tax. Maybe that'll be reinvested then into.
I don't see it. No, because it's not. There's no quid pro quo. It's like here's a bunch of free money. It comes back. Why would it be necessarily being reinvested? I mean, we've done this before.
Won't there be incentives put in place to make companies?
Well, I guess the question is, would be carrots or sticks?
Might be tweets at 3 a.m.
Yeah, which I'm not opposed to always.
Okay, for 3 a.m. tweets. I think let's open it up. Have we got any questions from the audience here that we could take to our panel? We have one just over here, sir. Can we have a microphone? Do we have a microphone around? There's one coming down.
We know it's after
just
lunch,
down
so
here,
we're trying to spice it up here.
Exactly. Keep people awake.
Yes, a microphone that's on its way. You can speak loudly.
And we'll repeat the question. Yeah.
Actually, here you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This is Khalid from Saudi Arabia. I actually enjoyed the dialogue so much, and thank you for that.
Thank you.
Very valid information and the views that you shared with us. You've talked about Donald Trump's new policies and the changing that is happening, and he's surrounded by businessmen and CEOs as well. And too many people have already criticized that thing, and it's saying it's against America as how it used to be, and we're advocating for the open markets and liberalizing the borders with the countries. On the other hand, we know that China is growing in a faster shape. US economy used to contribute around 20 to 22% of the global GDP 40 years back, but it's declining to around 15 or 14% recently, while China is actually closely to surpass the US within a year or 2 years expected. Now, don't you see any positive signs or any significant change might happen or might occur with the new system or the new way of managing the country with the Trump? Is there any positive thing? Though I'm agreeing with you.
Go ahead. I think we're both saying there's the potential for a lot of positive here with the president's policies, but I guess I'm saying we need to, because of the leadership vacuum, people in place. This is going to take a little more longer to play out, and we have to be careful and attentive and watch and be engaged.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think in terms of problem definition and raising awareness of that the way that the U.S. has done globalization has not benefited the majority of American people. I think that's really important and really valuable. I think his proposed solutions would actually make the problem worse.
Okay.
So.
There you go. Any other questions here? There's one over there I can see with your hand up. Yes, sir. Have we got a microphone? Just coming around to you. The microphone's on its way. There we go. You got it, sir.
Thank you very much. My question is, of course, it's also about President Trump. What would be the effect on the research area? Because I believe also with these new immigration, I would say, tendencies, that might have an effect also on the research fields. And I think more than 50% of all PhD students in the US do not have US background, and I wonder how your estimation would be. Thank you.
That's an outstanding question, and thank you for asking it. America has been built over the centuries of our existence on on immigration and the best and the brightest coming in and looking for a new opportunity and a new chance. And there has been a chilling impact. I think the Saudi student numbers, obviously they went down right after 9/11, but they climbed back up to over 100,000 students in the US. They're down to 60,000 now. I just saw a report from the Saudi government in the last week or so. So just from this region alone. But you look at India, you look at China, you look at the anti-immigration sentiment that's been unleashed in the United States. I mean, this is worrisome, and we need to get in front and get around this, because our country is built on being open and allowing the best and the brightest to come and contribute.
Susan.
No, I would agree with that, and I guess I'd point out another aspect of the policy that I think is bad for innovation, which is cutting the budgets of government. Is a relatively small part of R&D financing in the U.S., but it often provides a very important catalyst, and those budgets are either flat or falling in what's been proposed by President Trump. So yeah, I worry about it. I mean, I think the U.S. right now, U.S. manufacturing right now is kind of caught in the middle between U.S. and I would say Mexico and China. We're not low wage like them, but we're also not high skill like Germany. I'd like to see us move in the high skill direction, but these difficulties in innovation, hurdles that we're setting up, are making that more difficult.
Okay, we're going to have to wind this up. Well, I've got a few seconds to abuse my power and come back with one final quick question. Okay, Mr. Trump has departed the White House. You are now in charge. Tell me the one lever you would pull.
On manufacturing.
On manufacturing, on revitalizing the economic growth of manufacturing. You can pull two if you like.
I think I would like to see a big policy to jumpstart building renewable energy infrastructure in the U.S. I think that would employ a lot of people. It would, show leadership around reducing climate change, which the U.S. is a big contributor to, and promote innovation. So that would be my lever.
Okay.
For me, it's all about education, and I think why Democrats and Republicans got into the situation that they are today with the Electoral College and the votes and job loss and everything else is because we've lost our way on retooling, helping people, help re-educate folks if sectors have disappeared or jobs were exported. We need a more comprehensive policy for how we train and educate not only our youth, but middle-aged people who lose their jobs and train them into new career fields for the future. And it's got to be comprehensive. And it's got to be a federal government policy in conjunction with the state governments.
That's terrific. Now we're right out of time. Everybody please join me. A big round of applause. Susan and Danny, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. We're now into a second session. I'm off to the briefing room, not the briefing room, a breakout room, I think it's called. And Simon is coming back on stage here. So we're quick reorganization.